Amnesia, Justine. Chapter 1. I woke to darkness, thick, suffocating darkness, pressing in on me from all sides. As my eyes adjusted, I could just make out the rough stone walls of some kind of small chamber, illuminated by a faint shaft of light from above. I sat up slowly, my head throbbing. Where was I? How did I get here? I tried to think back, but my mind felt sluggish, clouded. I could remember nothing before waking up in this cramped, empty cell. Groping in the dark, I felt a cold metal door with no handle or lock, no way to open it from the inside. The only openings were a small slit at the bottom, just big enough to push a food tray through, and the barred opening at the top letting in a dim glow. Standing on my toes, I peered out but could see only a flickering torch on a stone wall opposite my cell. "Hello!" I called out, my voice echoing down the empty stone corridors outside. "Is anyone there? Why am I locked in here?" Only silence answered. Unease mounting, I paced the short length of my cell, running my hands along the rough walls, searching for any means of escape. But there was nothing. The cell was bare except for a pile of dirty straw in one corner that seemed to serve as a bed. Exhausting myself trying to find a way out, I eventually sank down onto the foul-smelling straw. How long would I be trapped here? What was this place? Frustration and fear roiled inside me. I knew nothing about who I was or how I came to be imprisoned. My identity itself seemed locked away out of reach, leaving only a black void whenever I tried to recall my past. As I brooded in the dark, a scrap of paper lying near the door caught my eye. I snatched it up, straining to read the elaborate script in the dim light. It appeared to be a note addressed to me. "Welcome to my castle. I apologize for the unorthodox accommodations, but they are necessary, you see, for the experiment that awaits you. I am Madame Justine Florbelle, director of the Brennenburg Asylum for the mentally afflicted, and I have chosen you for the singular purpose of assessing the strength of your character. Everyone is endowed with 3 key virtues: honesty, charity, and temperance. But how deeply do you embody them? That is what we will discover through a series of tests I have designed to lay bare the inner workings of your mind. Success will reveal your worth. Failure will reveal your flaws. The games begin when you awake. I await the chance to illuminate what kind of man you truly are beneath the surface trappings of society. The best of luck to you. JF. I read the note over and over again, a chill creeping through me. Tests and games to determine my innermost virtues. A sense of foreboding filled me. If this Madame Justine spoke the truth, I seemed to be at the mercy of some kind of elaborate, dangerous psychological experiment with no memory of consenting to participate. Some strange asylum called Brennenburg. Slipping the note into my pocket, I paced my cell anxiously. There had to be some way out of this madness. But each time I examined the door and walls, I found them maddeningly solid. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me once more and I collapsed onto the dirty straw, wrestling with fear and confusion as I waited for whatever these tests might bring. Perhaps when morning came I would have answers instead of more questions about my imprisonment. Perhaps. Chapter 2. I jolted awake suddenly to the echoing clang of metal hitting stone. Blinking in the torchlight streaming from outside my cell, I saw a tray of putrid slop had been shoved through the slit in my door. My throat was parched, but I pushed the rank meal away, my stomach churning with anxiety. Daylight at last, but it only illuminated my confines with cruel clarity. I peered out past the bars at the top of my cell door, searching for any clue to my whereabouts. My view was limited to a length of bare stone corridor lit by flickering torches, with heavy wooden doors like mine spaced at intervals. Somewhere far off, I could hear faint echoes, cries and moans muffled by distance and stone. The sound sent a chill through me. What horrors was this place hiding? I paced my tiny cell relentlessly, my mind spinning. The cryptic note crumpled in my pocket from Madame Justine Florbelle seemed my only clue. What had it said? Tests to illuminate my inner virtues of honesty, charity, and temperance? But why? I racked my brain trying to recall anything about how I'd come to be Justine's prisoner. Only a void met my efforts, my own identity obscured from me by a suffocating fog of amnesia. Frustrated, I let out a ragged yell, pounding the unyielding door with my fists. The blows echoed down the stone corridors, fading into silence. There was no escape. Slumping down in defeat, my eyes fell again upon Justine's meticulous handwriting. "Welcome to my castle." My blood chilled. Castle! Then it dawned on me, the flickering torchlight, echoing stone corridors, Gothic script. This prison must be some sort of medieval castle or fortress, repurposed into a mental asylum run by this mysterious Justine Florbelle. A key phrase from the note leapt out at me again: the Brennenburg Asylum for the mentally afflicted. My mind raced. If this place was indeed an asylum, perhaps I was locked up because Justine considered me insane or mentally ill, in need of her treatment. Or maybe I was an unwitting subject brought here against my will, now trapped in her bizarre experiments. I knew not which notion unsettled me more as I paced my confines. But I did know one thing: I had to escape. There must be some way out of this cell, out of Justine's grasp. I just had to search more, look closer, find some weakness in my prison and exploit it. I ran my hands over each stone in the walls, pounded on the door, desperately seeking a hidden switch or loose block, anything. But there was nothing. Escape seemed impossible. Despair flooded through me as the shadows lengthened, the torchlight fading. Yet as darkness enveloped my cell once more, I knew I could not give up. I had to cling to hope. Somewhere in this castle asylum's maze of corridors and rooms lay answers about my lost identity and who had trapped me here. No twisted experiment of Justine's could rob me of my will to be free. I would escape this cell or die trying. For if I remained here subject to her whims, I feared uncovering far darker truths about myself than I could bear. Chapter 3. I must have dozed off, for suddenly I jerked awake. Blinking, I realized my cell was now lit by the warm glow of morning sunlight streaming through the barred window in my door. Had that light always been there? I couldn't recall. My mind felt foggy, thoughts clouded. Then, with a chill, I remembered I was a prisoner here in the Brennenburg Asylum, at the mercy of some woman named Justine Florbelle. I rushed to the cell door, peering out desperately for any means of escape. But the corridor remained empty, silent. The only sign of life was a fresh tray of food shoved through the slit. My throat burned with thirst, but I pushed the rotten meal away. I would not be broken by deprivation. Anguish threatened to overwhelm me. Was there no way out of this nightmare? Just then, a faint skittering sound reached my ears. Pressing against the door, I saw a large rat sniffing at the discarded food tray. An idea flashed through my mind. If a rat could fit under the door, perhaps I could as well. I shoved and kicked at the tray, trying to block the slit so no more could pass. The rodent fled down the corridor. Heart pounding, I lay flat on my stomach and peered under the door. The opening was barely a foot high, but maybe just enough for me to squeeze under. Working my fingers under the edge, I pulled with all my strength, straining to lift the heavy door. For long minutes I struggled fruitlessly, collapsing back in exhaustion. But I could not give up. My one chance at freedom lay just out of reach. Mustering my energy, I grabbed a loose stone from the floor and used it as a wedge under the door. Throwing my full weight against it, I heard the shuddering crack of metal as the bottom lifted slightly. Half crawling, half dragging myself, I managed to squeeze my shoulders and then hips through the gap. It was agonizingly tight, the ancient metal cutting my flesh, but with a final determined kick I pulled myself free, collapsing panting on the cold stone floor. Freedom. My heart soared for a moment before I took in my new surroundings. I found myself in a long hallway lined with torches and heavy wooden doors like the one I'd escaped. Each presumably hid more lost souls trapped as I had been. The echoes of anguished cries seeped under some doors, while behind others lay only silence. Wincing, I stood. My body was bruised and bloodied from forcing my way out, but that pain seemed trivial now. I had no idea where I was or where to go, yet I knew I could not stay here. Justine or her wardens would soon discover my escape. Choosing a direction at random, I moved as swiftly as my injured form would allow down the hallway. The rough stone walls and ceiling enclosed me like a tomb. I passed more and more oaken doors and iron-barred cells, but no turns or exits appeared. Until finally, up ahead, I spotted a winding stone staircase leading up. Heart pounding, I climbed the steps, which emerged onto an identical torch-lit corridor. Was I going in circles? Despair threatened to crush me again, but I pushed on desperately. Somewhere in this maze lay a way out. I chose left this time, then right when I found branching paths. The hallways remained monotonous and empty. I began trying doors, finding most locked fast. Rounding a corner, I froze. Sounds of scurrying footsteps and low moans echoed from up ahead. The wardens. I frantically tried a nearby door, exhaling with relief as it creaked open. Slipping inside the dark room, I drew the door shut just as hulking shadows passed outside. Pressed against the cold wood, I stifled panicked breaths. The warden's footsteps faded into the distance. But I knew I was far from safe. Escape still lay somewhere ahead, in this treacherous labyrinth. Steeling myself, I turned to examine the room I had hidden in. My blood turned to ice. Gleaming implements of torment lined the walls, the knives, saws, wicked metal claws, and more. Chains ending in manacles hung from the ceiling. Dark stains covered the floor below them. Revulsion rose in my throat. What kind of vile acts had this ruin witnessed at the hands of my captor Justine? Nausea overwhelmed me. I had to get out of this house of horrors. Now. Taking a deep breath, I slipped back into the corridor. The wardens could return at any moment. But I could not let fear paralyze me. Creeping swiftly onward through the twisting stone passages, I was more determined than ever to find a way out of this madness. If Justine thought she could break my mind and spirit with her twisted games, she was gravely mistaken. Chapter 4. I crept through the shadowy halls for what seemed like hours, descending spiraling stairs and passing countless locked doors. But still no exit appeared. Despair gnawed at me. Was there no end to this labyrinth? Rounding a corner, I froze. Gleaming metal doors blocked my path, different from the weathered wood of the prison cells. Strange mechanical sounds echoed from behind them. Where did they lead? I reached out a trembling hand to grasp the handle. Welcome, my subject. I whirled around with a gasp. A woman's voice, refined and coldly elegant, rang from somewhere overhead. Squinting in the torchlight, I could just make out metal-grated speakers set into the stone ceiling at intervals. The voice continued, I am pleased you decided to participate more fully in our experiments. That shows an honest impulse worthy of acknowledgement. I stared up at the speakers in disbelief. This must be the Madame Justine Florbelle who had imprisoned me here. Anger coursed through me. Participate, I spat back. You trapped me here against my will. I won't be part of your twisted games. A chilling, musical laugh echoed through the halls. Oh, but you already are, and I believe you possess the capacity to excel if you embrace the journey before you. I glared at the lifeless speakers. I'll die before I become your plaything. There is no virtue in what you're doing. On the contrary, my experiments are vital. Only by traveling into the darkest recesses of your spirit may we illuminate the noble qualities within, tests of honesty, charity, and temperance. Revulsion twisted my gut. You're completely deranged. I'm leaving this place. I turned back towards the metal doors, resolve burning within me. Tempting, but you'll find all other paths barred to you now. Your only way forward lies through participating in my tests. Each door represents a different trial, specially crafted. I think you'll find the first quite electrifying. I hesitated, hands inches from the cold metal handle. Some inner voice warned me away even as frustration and anger churned within me. But Justine was right. I was trapped here. All I could do was play her twisted game and try to find a way out. Taking a breath, I pulled open the heavy doors. Inside lay a spacious chamber bathed in red light, empty save for a lone strange machine in the center. Cautiously, I entered. Excellent. Justine's gleeful voice crackled overhead. Now approach the conductor. Your first test will assess the virtue of honesty. I think you'll find it quite illuminating. I tensed, peering at the bizarre device. It appeared to be some sort of box or chamber large enough to hold a person, with wires and tubes feeding out of it to various ominous pieces of equipment. What do you want me to do? I asked warily. It's quite simple. Inside the conductor is a subject I've placed into a highly suggestive state. On the machine are a series of switches connected to the tubes entering the box. Flipping them will regulate the flow of certain gases. I stared at the conductor. A person was trapped in this thing? Horror crept through me. Justine continued, to pass the test, you must follow my instructions exactly as I say while avoiding any unpleasant effects. I want to see how honest you are. The subject's life is in your hands. Her last words sent ice through my veins. I wanted no part of this sadistic game. But Justine left me no choice. Let us begin. Set the hydrogen flow to 0.2%. With trembling hands, I approached the machine. What twisted test of honesty was this? Sensing no other option, I slowly turned the switch as Justine instructed. I had to survive long enough to somehow turn the tables on my captor. As the first switch clicked into place, a faint whimper emanated from within the metal box. My heart wrenched. Just what was happening to the poor soul trapped inside? And what did Justine have planned for me? I steeled myself as her cold voice directed me to the next switch. Chapter 5. My hands shook as I flipped another switch on the strange machine called the conductor, following Justine's icy instructions. With each new gas I enabled, muffled cries emanated from the chamber containing her captive test subject. "Excellent. You're doing marvelously so far," Justine commented over the speakers, a smile in her voice. "Now increase the methane 3%. I hesitated, sickened by the thought of harming the trapped person further. But refusal would likely only lead to my own torture. Gritting my teeth, I adjusted the switch. The subject's whimpers rose into anguished screams, tearing at my heart. What was this meant to prove about my honesty? In defiance, I moved to shut off the gas flow. Justine said sharply. "Do not attempt to circumvent the test. This is a delicate experiment requiring precise calibration." Despite her mild tone, an undercurrent of threat colored her words. Clenching my fists, I stepped back from the switches. I was at her mercy here. "Increase oxygen by 1.5%, Justine instructed next. Warily, I complied. The subject's screams quieted, replaced by ragged breathing. Clearly, they were in great distress. I longed to tear open the metal box and free them from this horror. But the machine looked impenetrable. "It seems you can follow orders well when motivated," Justine mused. "But honesty requires more than mere obedience." I glared up at the speakers, despising her so-called virtue tests. What honesty did this cruelty prove? "Let us make things a bit more challenging." Excitement filled Justine's voice. Set the chamber pressure to 10 psi. Uncertainly, I searched the machine's gauges until I found the setting she requested. As I hesitantly turned the dial, a high-pitched whine filled the room. The cries from within the box became frantic, desperately pleading. My gut wrenched. "Please, stop this," I shouted over the noise. "Can't you see you're torturing them?" "Our subject knew the risks when they agreed to participate," Justine replied coolly. "Now increase the pressure to 20 psi. Do not defy me." Swallowing my disgust, I complied, turning the dial further. The whine rose to a piercing shriek. From inside the conductor came the sounds of fists, desperately pounding the metal walls accompanied by choked screams. "You're killing them," I cried out. "Please, stop this madness. I'll do anything. Just don't make me hurt them further." The screams intensified, echoing through the chamber, mixing with the conductor's piercing whine. I felt I would go mad if this went on any longer. Then, suddenly, Justine's voice rang out. "Enough, well done. You have completed the first test." I blinked in shock as the conductor powered down, the room going silent save for the trapped subject's weak whimpers. It was over. Justine spoke again. "You showed willingness to obey commands despite ethical concerns, promising honesty if somewhat tainted by sentimentality." I glared up furiously. There was no honesty or virtue in what you made me do. That was pointless sadism. Oh, on the contrary, I gleaned valuable insights into your character. That is why you're here, after all. Amusement filled Justine's tone. "But we can explore your objections during your next test. Proceed through the far door when you are ready." Clenching my fists, I approached the metal box. "First free whoever's trapped in here. I won't let you put anyone else through your tortures." "My subjects are no concern of yours," Justine replied coldly. "Now go, the next test awaits." I slammed a fist against the conductor in frustration, eliciting a weak cry from within. Whoever was trapped in there needed help. But Justine clearly wouldn't release them without a fight. As much as it galled me, I had to bide my time for now and play her twisted game. With a last glare at the speakers, I turned and strode from the room. I had survived the first trial, but Justine was far from done probing the dark corners of my soul. Would I find the means to turn her own methods against her? Or would her experiments break me entirely, lost in this endless maze of suffering? Only one thing was certain: the true test had just begun. Chapter 6. The heavy metal door clanged shut behind me as I left the disturbing first test chamber behind. My heart still hammered from being forced to torture that poor trapped soul within the conductor machine. What had it accomplished besides satisfying Justine's sadistic whims? She spoke of revealing my honesty, but her experiments seemed intentionally designed to blur the line between ethical action and self-preservation. I took a moment to collect myself in the dim stone passage beyond, letting my eyes trace over the Gothic arched ceiling and iron sconces holding flickering candles that illuminated the way forward. There had to be something I could use against Justine within these halls, some weakness to exploit. But so far, she held all the power. Well done surviving the first trial. Justine's melodic voice echoed suddenly from overhead. I must say, you are progressing even better than I'd hoped. Most subjects find the initial tests overwhelming. I glowered up at the metal grill speakers set into the ceiling. Don't pretend you care about my well-being. I'm just another twisted experiment to you. Amused laughter rang out. You underestimate my affection for you, my subject. Like a sculptor, I am crafting you, drawing out your quintessence. It is an intimate bond. You make me sick, I growled back through gritted teeth. Come now, anger will only cloud your progress. The virtues require an open mind. Justine's tone turned coaxing. I think you'll find the next test enlightening. Do you know what separates heroes from villains? The willingness for self-sacrifice. I tensed, a chill creeping down my spine. What was she implying? Justine continued. Proceed to the metal door ahead. Beyond lies a trial of charity, assessing your capacity to place others above yourself. Apprehension gripped me, but I stepped forward resolutely. I won't be swayed by your manipulations, Justine. My choices remain my own. That chilling laugh echoed again. Oh, we shall see. I look forward to witnessing if your soul is righteous or corrupt. The speakers fell silent. With a mix of fear and defiance, I approached the waiting metal door and turned the handle. I may be her prisoner, but I would face whatever depraved trial she devised for me on my own terms. Justine deluded herself, thinking she could dictate who I was during her games. But preserving my identity and values was the only way to withstand her relentless assaults on my psyche. Stepping into the room, illuminated by a blood-red glow, I steeled myself. I would not become the monster Justine tried to shape me into with her cruel experiments. The true test was only just beginning. Chapter 7. Steeling myself, I stepped through the metal door into Justine's charity test chamber. Compared to the cruel conductor machine from the first trial, this room appeared disarmingly simple, merely a small, empty space with a locked gate on the far wall. Unease crept through me as I surveyed my surroundings. Some new sadistic trap surely awaited. Justine's taunting voice crackled from overhead. Welcome to the second trial. Here we will assess if self-interest outweighs your compassion. Behind the locked gate awaits a path to freedom, or does it? I tensed. The promise of escape so close at hand was surely a deception. The key that unlocks the gate hangs on the wall, but know this, taking it dooms the subject in the conductor box to horrific demise. Justine's words turned icy. So the choice falls to you, a stranger's life or your own freedom. I stared at the ornate key glinting on the stone wall, conflicted emotions welling up. Whatever I decided, Justine would twist it to support her narrative of my supposed virtue or corruption. But could I live with the consequences either way? Grimacing in frustration, I turned my focus to examining the locked gate barring my path. Rusting iron bars were set deep into the surrounding stone. I gave an experimental tug on the lock, but it held fast. The solid metal looked virtually unbreakable. Clearly, the key was the only way forward. But at what cost? I paced the small room like a caged animal, mind racing. The right choice seemed unclear when Justine so obviously rigged the game against me. Suddenly, the speakers crackled back to life. "Come now, make your choice. If you cannot decide, I may be forced to take disciplinary measures." Menace tinged Justine's tone. I froze, staring up at the lifeless grill. If I refused to take part in her game, Justine would likely just reactivate the torture machine remotely. At least if I played along, I might uncover some way to overcome her twisted schemes. Swallowing my disgust, I moved to the wall and lifted the ornate key from its setting, the metal cold in my palm, an instrument of temptation and sin crafted by Justine's own hand. For a brief moment, I fantasized about using it as a weapon against her. But such thoughts accomplished nothing now. Approaching the gate, I slipped the key into the iron lock. Freedom awaited on the other side, Justine claimed. But experience warned me the path led only to continued suffering. With a heavy sense of dread, I turned the key in the mechanism and heard the latch click open. The gate creaked inward, revealing a doorway shrouded in darkness. What fresh nightmare lay beyond? Steeling my nerves, I stepped through into the shadows. Justine's machinations would not defeat me. Chapter 8. I crept forward apprehensively through inky blackness, one hand trailing along damp stone. The gate had closed behind me with an echoing clang, leaving no choice but to blindly feel my way ahead into the void. Around me came skittering sounds and faint groans that raised the hairs on my neck. Where had Justine's supposed path to freedom led? Finally, my fingertips brushed a wooden surface. Fumbling, I felt the contours of a torch mounted in a bracket. I wrenched it free, and after several attempts, managed to spark a flame using a piece of flint placed conveniently at hand. Light flared through the darkness, illuminating a scene from a nightmare. I stood at the top of a winding stone staircase leading down into some subterranean chamber. The walls were coated in grime and strange markings stained the steps. Cold air rushed up from below, carrying the smell of mold, earth, and something fouler, a sickly sweet stench of decay. Revulsion crawled through me. Justine had not granted freedom, merely dragged me deeper into her own personal underworld. But I could not turn back now. Gripping the torch in white-knuckled hands, I began my descent. The temperature plummeted as I wound downward. The stench of death and decomposition grew stronger with each step until I had to breathe through my mouth to keep from gagging. This was a charnel house. At the bottom of the stairs, the passageway opened into a large circular chamber. Holding the torch aloft, I beheld a vision from hell itself. Along the circumference, human figures sat chained to the walls in various states of dismemberment and decay. Many appeared long dead, while others were horribly emaciated, but still moved weakly. All had 4 tubes puncturing their arms, snaking up to collect precious bodily fluids. In the chamber's center sat a large glass cylinder filled with a viscous red liquid. Blood drained from these poor souls. Metal pipes fed out of it into the walls. I realized with disgust that this entire vampiric system kept the remaining living victims alive solely to harvest more. Sickened, I moved to the nearest shackled form still breathing. It was a woman, her skeletal face etched in pain as she feebly lifted her head. My heart broke. Was this to be my own fate if I could not escape? Spotting a lever on the wall, I hesitated, then pulled it. With a groan of grinding stone, the woman's chains began to retract, lowering her gently to the floor. Freeing these survivors might help lead us both out of this nightmare. Before I could act further, Justine's voice pierced the silence from a speaker overhead. "What do you think you're doing?" I glared up defiantly. "Freeing these people. I won't let you continue harvesting them like animals in a slaughterhouse." Amused laughter rang out. Such compassion for strangers, but no, they cannot survive long without my machine's sustenance. "I'll take that chance," I shot back. "Now release the rest." "You are in no position to make demands. Desist at once or face punishment." I ignored Justine's threats, moving to pull the next subject's lever. But as I reached for it, searing pain suddenly exploded through every nerve in my body, radiating from the needle-marked foreport on my arm. I collapsed, writhing to the floor where the agony subsided, leaving me gasping. "A warning only," Justine said coldly over the speakers. "Further defiance will not be tolerated. Now, shall we proceed with the real test?" Body still twitching with residual pain, I forced myself to stand. There had to be some way to resist and free these prisoners. But Justine clearly had me once more at her mercy. All I could do for now was endure. Chapter 9. Gasping, I dragged myself up the winding stone steps away from the underground harvesting chamber, Justine's soft laughter echoing from the speakers behind. My body still shuddered from the torturous jolt she'd used to subdue my defiance. But the pain was nothing compared to the anguish of being unable to help those poor suffering people chained below. Their sunken eyes haunted me as I ascended back into shadowy torch-lit corridors. Reaching the top, I collapsed onto the cold stones, heart pounding. The iron gate ahead was shut fast, preventing any return the way I'd come. I was sealed once more into Justine's twisted maze. Despair threatened to overtake me. How could I retain any shred of hope or identity under her relentless assaults? Exhaustion overcame me and I slipped into fitful unconsciousness. But too soon I jerked awake with a cry as vivid nightmares blended into reality. The conductor's wails, the wasted bodies chained below, all victims just like me sacrificed on the altar of Justine's madness. I hugged my knees, struggling to regain control. After a time, I pushed myself unsteadily to my feet. Justine had proven I could not openly defy her. But I refused to let her break me. I just needed time to recover my strength and wits. Spotting a small alcove concealed behind a moth-eaten tapestry, I ducked within. The space felt comforting, hidden away from Justine's cameras. Settling down, I allowed my mind to drift, imagining myself somewhere, anywhere, afar from this Gothic dungeon. Visions came unbidden of grassy meadows and sun-warmed forests. If I focused, I could almost smell wildflowers and hear birdsong instead of anguished cries. I clung desperately to these sensory details, using them as lifelines to pull my psyche back from the brink of darkness. Bit by bit, the tension eased from my body. My breathing slowed. By visualizing freedom beyond these walls, I could deny Justine her victory in spirit if not in flesh. A tentative calm restored, I stood and steeled myself to re-enter the labyrinth. Doubtless Justine had already devised her next trial. But I would face it with my inner light only burning stronger for having found a way to nourish it. She could torture my body, but my mind was mine to defend. Stepping from my hidden sanctuary, I moved forward with new resolve through the torch-lit corridors. The shadows still harbored untold horrors, yet so too did they conceal the keys to withstand Justine's manipulations. All I needed was the will to seek them out. Chapter 10. The winding corridors remained eerily silent as I navigated their twists and turns, steeling myself for Justine's next test. What new ways to break my psyche would she employ? I still shuddered remembering the visceral horror of her underground lair designed to farm humans like hell for their precious bodily resources. What fresh hell awaited? Rounding a corner, I froze. The passage terminated abruptly in a towering set of carved oak doors. Kerosene lamps on either side cast flickering shadows, giving the entire scene a nightmarish quality. Apprehension gripped me in icy tendrils. My next trial surely waited beyond. As if sensing my presence, Justine's refined voice crackled to life from hidden speakers. "Welcome, my subject, you have done adequately thus far, but the true assessments are still to come." I tensed, glaring up at the lifeless grill. "Haven't you put me through enough torment already? What more could you hope to learn?" Disappointed clicking of the tongue echoed through the hall. Now, self-pity will not avail you. There are always deeper layers to unfold, shadows in the psyche to illuminate. A smile entered Justine's tone. "Today, we shall plumb the depths of human compassion. Tell me, when survival is at stake, to what lengths would you go to place others' needs above your own?" I frowned, a chill creeping down my spine. Given what she'd already put me through, I feared where this line of questioning led. Sensing my hesitation, Justine continued. "The heart is a mysterious thing, is it not? Capable of boundless good or terrible evil, when tested. Step inside and learn which qualities shine brightest in the crucible of your own spirit." Swallowing back bile at her silken threats, I steeled myself and shoved open the towering doors. I would never stop fighting to retain my humanity, whatever atrocities Justine demanded I commit. Beyond lay a scene of artistic horror. Another red-lit chamber stretched before me, empty save for a lone medical gurney surrounded by various instruments, scalpels, bone saws, clamps, and more. Shackles lay open, waiting to bind helpless flesh. The walls were lined with cabinets, their glass fronts revealing chemicals, vials, and stranger organic shapes floating in preservation fluid. But most disturbing was the far wall, taken up by an enormous painting depicting figures writhing in hellish anguish, their distorted bodies seeming to blend into macabre medical experiments and acts of cannibalism. A title was etched at the bottom, "The Price of Charity." Sick certainty filled me. This was a surgical theater designed by Justine to play out her twisted visions under the guise of testing virtue. There was no limit to the horrors this room had witnessed, or would soon. Admiring my decor? Justine purred. "I designed this space to properly assess the noble instinct to aid others when no benefit nor obligation exists. Tell me, when push comes to shove, who will you sacrifice, them or yourself?" I clenched my fists. Whatever Justine had planned, I refused to become a monster under her manipulation. But as I beheld the grisly instruments and imagined what charity she might demand of me in this room, cold fear crept through my veins. Justine excelled at blurring moral lines. Would I find the strength to cling to who I was, or like so many before me become yet another tortured figure in her painting, twisted beyond all recognition? Only one way to know. I stepped forward into the nightmare. Chapter 11. My footsteps echoed eerily through the red-lit operating theater. I forced myself to begin examining the macabre instruments lining the walls, searching for anything that might aid me. But these were tools designed to inflict suffering, not salvation. A particularly vicious implement caught my eye, a long serrated blade attached to a breathing tube. I quickly looked away from the gruesome surgical tools, focusing instead on the disturbing painting that dominated the far wall. The twisted figures seemed to writhe in eternal torment, their distorted bodies blended with nightmarish medical experiments. This was clearly Justine's artistic vision of charity, a virtue tested through suffering. I refused to let her sow cruelty in my heart, no matter what she inflicted upon me in this place. If I gave in to hate, she would win. Footsteps echoed suddenly outside the chamber. Before I could react, the doors swung open and two hulking orderlies entered, dragging a semi-conscious woman between them. With contemptuous force, they hauled her to the gurney and locked her in the shackles. "What are you doing?" I demanded, rushing forward. "Let her go." The orderlies ignored me, securing the prisoner to the table before departing as silently as they'd arrived. Alone now, the woman moaned softly, struggling against her bonds. My heart twisted at her distress. "Don't worry, I'll find a way to get you out of here," I soothed. But the restraints were thick and unyielding. I desperately searched for anything to pick the complex locks. Justine's amused voice crackled overhead. "How noble, though misguided, you cannot help her." I froze, peering upward. "Why are you doing this? She's done nothing wrong." "Her innocence matters not. It is you who are being tested after all. Let us begin." Dark anticipation filled Justine's words. "On the table you will find surgical instruments. Use them to procure me a kidney from this subject." "What?" I recoiled in disgust. "You're completely insane. I'd never commit such an act." "Do this small, distasteful task, and in exchange I shall permit you both to walk free from this place forever." Justine's tone turned coaxing. "Think of it as noble sacrifice for the greater good." I trembled with rage at the vile bargain offered. The woman on the table gazed at me pleadingly. However I responded, we were both Justine's prisoners. Turning my back on the grisly instruments, I grasped the woman's shackled hand in my own. "I promise you won't suffer further if I can prevent it. Have courage." She squeezed my hand weakly. No matter what Justine threatened, I prayed my choice was the right one. Chapter 12. The woman on the gurney clung desperately to my hand as Justine's voice echoed through the chamber again. "Come now, if you will not use the instruments I've provided, we must find other ways to test your virtue." Hidden gears grinded, and a section of the wall slid away, revealing a darkened alcove. Something lay within, though I could not make out what. Apprehension gnawed at my insides. "In life, there are always alternatives," Justine purred. "Hidden choices only visible to those willing to embrace the darkness." Letting go of the prisoner's hand reluctantly, I crept towards the recess, blood roaring in my ears. As I drew near, the shape within resolved into a body, sprawled unnaturally on the ground. I gagged, recoiling in horror. It was a mutilated corpse, chest cracked open grotesquely to expose pulsing organs. Machinery whirred, animating the organs in a mockery of life. Laughter echoed over the speakers. "Meet your donor. No need to carve up the living when the dead can serve just as well. Take what you require so that I may reward you both with release, as promised." I trembled with fury and revulsion. This macabre offering exposed the lie. Justine never intended to free anyone. She wanted only to erode my spirit through increasingly monstrous acts. "I'll die in this hell before mutilating the deceased for your amusement," I spat. Justine clucked her tongue. "If that is your choice, so be it, but know your moral squeamishness condemns this woman to unspeakable agonies. Her torment shall haunt your dreams." "No, please," the prisoner shrieked, writhing against her unyielding bonds as I backed away from the corpse in defeat. I had failed her. A mechanical arm tipped with a long needle unfurled from the ceiling, descending towards the gurney. The woman's cries grew frenzied. Then the needle pierced her neck, silencing her as it pumped unknown toxins into her veins. Her body spasmed, then went limp. Rage and anguish tore through me. I had refused to surrender my principles, yet done nothing to prevent this brutality. Justine's machinations turned virtue into weakness, compassion into ruin. If I did not adapt, we would all be lost. But I could not yet bring myself to cross those final ethical lines, not even to spare suffering. Eyes burning, I left the body untouched and turned away from the alcove. If I focused only on survival, then Justine had already won. My humanity was all I had left. Chapter 13. I sat slumped in despair against the cold stone wall of the operating theater, tormented by echoes of the woman prisoner's agonized cries as Justine's injection racked her body. My refusal to mutilate the corpse as demanded had doomed her, and like me, to continued torture. Yet, if I relented and committed such vile acts for Justine's amusement, it would destroy the last vestiges of my humanity more certainly than any physical pain could. Her sick games placed me in no-win situations by design. Overhead, the speakers crackled ominously back to life. "Congratulations are in order. You have passed the test." I blinked, looking upward in surprise and suspicion. "What do you mean, I refused your depraved request?" Amused laughter rang out. "Indeed, and in doing so, you demonstrated virtue untainted by mortal desires. It is not the acts you commit that I care for, but rather illuminating the essence of your character through them. Well done." I tensed warily. Justine's pleasant words concealed poison, as always. Of course, rewards come to those who fully indulge the darkness, as you'll soon discover. The speakers fell silent again. Before I could react, the chamber doors groaned open. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hall beyond. I scrambled up in alarm. Had Justine grown tired of her twisted game and sent minions to dispose of me now that she'd had her fill? I looked around wildly for anything to defend myself. To my shock, 2 robed figures entered bearing the woman prisoner from earlier. She was bound securely, head lolled to one side, but still breathed. Relief and confusion warred within me. Without a word, the orderlies deposited her on the gurney once more and skulked out. As they left, I rushed over to check her bonds. To my astonishment, they came free with only light pressure. Justine had ordered the woman released. But why? As I helped the groggy prisoner sit up, Gravel came whirring over the intercom. "You have a choice: embrace corruption and be granted your heart's desire, or cling to false virtue and remain condemned. Consider carefully." I frowned, more certain than ever I was being manipulated. But why look gift horses in mouth? For now, we were free of immediate danger. "Can you stand?" I asked gently. The woman nodded, leaning heavily on me for support. Whatever Justine's motives, my course seemed clear enough. Help this survivor escape somehow. Then find a way to turn the tables on my deranged captor for good. Chapter 14. I helped the frail woman from the gurney, letting her lean against me as she slowly regained her faculties. Though still dazed, fear shone bright in her eyes as she took in our surroundings, Justine's vile surgical theater, where she had so recently been tormented. "It's all right, I've got you now," I soothed gently. "We need to get out of this place. Do you think you can walk if I support you?" The prisoner's eyes refocused on me, and she nodded hesitantly. "Thank you for not giving in to that monster's demands. I know it can't have been easy." I looked away, ashamed. I just did what I thought was right, but it nearly condemned us both. I shook my head bitterly. Justine manipulates every choice. Maybe so, but you showed compassion even when it cost you. The woman squeezed my hand. Not all is lost while we retain our humanity. I blinked back tears, moved by her resilience. She was right. Justine could only claim victory if we abandoned mercy and embraced brutality. Our will to withstand was our salvation. Determination kindled within me. "Let's defy Justine by getting you out of here. Can you walk on your own?" Grimacing, the prisoner pulled away and took a few halting steps. "I think so. The drugs are wearing off." She shot me a brave smile. I smiled back, feeling hope rekindle. Together we turned and made our way on unsteady legs toward the chamber exit. The hallway outside lay dark and empty. Choosing a direction at random, we shuffled forward, using the wall for support. Adrenaline and fear pushed back our exhaustion. There were no maps or signs in this madhouse, but any path that put distance between us and Justine's lair felt like progress. Rounding a corner, I spotted a sturdy door barring our route. A simple lock sealed it fast, but spotting a likely tool laying nearby, I hastily worked to pick it open. The mechanism clicked, and the door swung inward. Beyond, we found a small disused storage room, coated in dust but otherwise empty. It wasn't much, yet I nearly wept in relief. A place to safely rest was an unbelievable luxury in the constant peril Justine forced upon us. I helped the woman ease down amid the dusty boxes. She was pale and drawn, but her eyes shone with wordless gratitude. We may be trapped in Justine's twisted game, but for now, we had survived her cruelty with our souls intact. And that was no small victory. I would let her take nothing more from me or this brave survivor. We would have hope. Chapter 15. The storage room proved a short-lived sanctuary. We had only rested for what seemed like minutes when the door unexpectedly groaned open again. I jolted up, body tensing for a fight. Had Justine's minions found us? But instead of muscular orderlies, a frail figure stumbled through the doorway, a man gaunt and hollow-eyed. His filthy rags hung limp on a skeletal frame. Ignoring us, he shuffled to the corner and huddled down, gazing warily around with the look of a frightened animal. I shared an uneasy glance with my fellow prisoner. Neither of us dared attract attention by questioning this stranger, yet his presence unnerved me. What new ploy was this? Cautiously, I approached the huddled figure. "It's all right," I said gently. "We're prisoners too. What's your name?" The sunken eyes flicked towards me, then away nervously. When he finally spoke, the voice was scarcely a rasp. "You shouldn't be here. She'll find you." I felt icy tendrils curl in my gut, but kept my voice calm. Find us, do you mean Justine? He flinched violently at the name. You mustn't say it. She'll hear. She always hears. He dissolved into muttering under his breath. Unease prickled my skin. I opened my mouth to ask more, but froze at the sound of laughter crackling overhead. We all cringed in unison. My, how the rats congregate, Justine's melodious voice purred over the hidden speakers. I hope the vermin might lead you to reflect upon the cost of clinging to false virtue. Meet my latest work. Not all subjects embrace darkness, no matter the rewards. I stared at the gibbering man in dawning horror. He was another test subject, broken by Justine's manipulations. Bile rose in my throat. Was this also to be my fate? Poor wretch pleases no one, not even himself, Justine mused. Without purpose, life becomes cage, don't you think? Anger burned through me. The only cage is the one you've trapped us in against our will. Can't you see the harm you're inflicting? Justine merely chuckled. Walk the paths of light or darkness. The choice is yours, but do not delude yourself. You remain here at my mercy, like all lost souls. The speakers fell silent. I trembled, fury and fear warring within me. The madman's presence was meant as a warning from Justine, conform or be destroyed. But I refused to bend. Taking my ally's hand, we slipped from the room, leaving the raving stranger behind. His guttural cries echoed down the empty hall, full of madness and anguish. But they only strengthened my resolve. I would act with compassion, not cruelty. With hope, not hatred. Justine could try to twist me into a monster, but I defined my own fate. She had not broken me yet. Chapter 16. Leaving the disturbing encounter with Justine's broken subject behind, we pressed on through the shadowy maze. But our ordeal had exhausted my companion. Her steps grew heavier and more faltering until she leaned fully against me, breathing raggedly. Just a little farther, we can rest soon, I encouraged gently. But in truth, I had no idea where to find refuge next. Rounding a corner, I froze. The hallway ended abruptly in a smooth stone wall. Doubling back the way we'd come revealed the same. We were trapped. As I searched frantically for any exit, Justine's melodious voice echoed overhead. How far you've come, like rats in a maze, but what awaits at the end, more trials, of course. I tensed, glaring upward. Haven't you put us through enough? Amused laughter answered. Oh, we've barely scratched the surface. Life is but a series of tests, revealing whether one embraces the heights of nobility or sinks into shadow. Let us explore which fate calls to you. I opened my mouth to respond, but froze as grinding sounds filled the corridor. The walls were moving. They crept slowly inward, forcing us into an ever smaller space. My companion cried out in dismay. We pressed desperately against the enclosing stone. Whichever path leads out, you must find quickly, Justine urged mockingly over the noise. I await your choice with bated breath. I shoved against the walls, but they were like solid slabs, utterly unyielding. Panic rose in my throat as the space contracted. There had to be some way out. The woman tugged urgently on my arm, pointing upward. I followed her gaze to a metal grate set into the ceiling. Of course, a ventilation shaft. Help me up, I urged. Lacing my fingers, I provided a foothold for her to clamber up and wrest the grate free. As the walls ground closer, she reached down, and I jumped, pulling myself up by her extended hands. We crawled desperately into the tiny passage, pipes scalding our skin. Behind us, the walls met with an awful final crunch. Collapsing in the cramped air shaft, I fought to control panic gasps. My racing heart slowly steadied. We were alive and free of Justine's trap. Perhaps regaining the upper hand was not impossible after all. Well done, you continue to surpass expectations. Justine's gleeful voice surrounded us, muted but omnipresent. Of course, your trials are just beginning. Go onward and embrace destiny. Jaw clenched, I helped my ally crawl forward. The vent sloped upward, promising escape. But we were merely trading one claustrophobic passage for another while remaining helpless in Justine's web. Still, as long as we drew breath, hope remained. I would find a way to defeat her yet. Chapter 17. The air shaft seemed endless as we crawled forward. The rusted metal scraped our hands and knees raw, pipes and outcrops bruising our bodies further with each awkward shuffle. But physical torment was nothing compared to the unyielding claustrophobia pressing down on us. Our world reduced to a dark, endless tunnel barely wide enough to breathe. Still we persevered, fueled by desperation and flickering hope. Justine's voice had fallen silent, but her presence haunted the shadows. She delighted in tightening the noose, believing that eventually we would crack and embrace her corrupted worldview simply to make the suffering stop. But I refused to bend. Each inch crawled reaffirmed my will to resist. Freedom awaited somewhere beyond this air shaft. I had to believe that her madness would take me. After what felt like hours, we came to a branch point. Left or right, either path led into darkness. I closed my eyes, focusing to still my trembling heart. We chose right and continued onward. The vent began slanting downward gradually until we found ourselves sliding as much as crawling. Wherever we were headed, this shaft was delivering us down into the bowels of the complex. The air grew colder, stale and heavy with the scent of wet earth. My companion gasped and clung to me as the vent opened suddenly into empty space. But ahead I could just make out a ladder leading down into some subterranean chamber, barely illuminated by an unseen light source. Gingerly I shifted my body through the opening and onto the creaking rungs. They felt damp and precariously brittle, but held for the moment. Once my ally joined me, I descended cautiously into the unknown. Reaching the bottom, I found myself in a small cave-like hollow, seemingly carved right from the bedrock. Dim light filtered down from cracks in the earth above. The space appeared empty, but a quick search revealed an opening disguised behind hanging vines. Cautiously, we crept through into a larger cavern. Massive, twisted stone columns stretched up into the gloom overhead. Our steps echoed oddly, as if the space was far vaster than the flickering torchlight revealed. The earthen walls glistened damply, trailing roots and fungal blooms. Where the earth had been carved away, rusted iron bars showed this to be part of some ancient catacombs or dungeon buried deep beneath the asylum. I suppressed a shudder. Our path was taking us down into the very foundations of this place. What nightmares from the distant past might we awaken? Welcome to the birthplace of Brennenburg Asylum. Justine's melodious voice echoed suddenly through the cavern as if drawn forth by my thoughts. These tunnels predate the modern edifice, stretching back centuries. I've so hoped to share their secrets with you. I tensed, peering about for the hidden speakers. More cruel games, Justine. Wasn't it enough to force us down into this sunless pit? She laughed. You sound so aggrieved, but take heart. Your trials here hold the seeds of transcendence. Those who embrace the darkness uncover wonders. As Justine's voice faded, grinding stone rang out. A section of the wall slid away, revealing a torch-lit passage beyond. Apprehension gripped me. More sadistic tests surely awaited down that path. But what choice did we have but to confront the unknown? Taking my companion's trembling hand, I stepped into the ancient tunnel. The rough-hewn walls undulated oddly in the flickering light, carved with disturbing shapes and half-glimpsed horrors. Very old magic seemed woven into the living rock. But I feared Justine unraveling that fabric with her own dark designs. Drawing a shaky breath, I moved forward. The horrors of this place may be ancient, but so too did they hold keys to withstand the fresh torments Justine devised in her endless pursuit to corrupt our souls. She would find me not so easily broken. Chapter 18. The nightmarish visions swirling across the cavern walls pressed in on me as we descended deeper into darkness. Grotesque faces leered from the writhing stone, howling silently in torment. Or perhaps only my fractured mind projected such phantasms in this place where reality held no meaning. No matter the path taken, Justine herded our steps toward her own unknowable ends. Only the cold, clammy grip of my companion's hand tethered me, reminding I still clung to some fragile shard of sanity and selfhood. But for how long? The susurrus of whispering voices tickled my ears, echoing from nowhere and everywhere at once. I could almost grasp their words, though the meaning slipped away like smoke. A strange foreboding filled me nonetheless. We were not alone down in these buried depths. Rounding a curve, I froze. Ahead, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern. The space glowed with eerie phosphorescent lichen clinging to the towering stone columns and arching ceilings now high overhead. Labyrinthine channels snaked off into darkness between the pillars. But more startling was the cavern's occupants, a ghostly, luminous shapes that glided through the glow and shadows. Spirits bound to this place, or merely visions implanted by Justine to torment me. I blinked hard, willing my eyes to pierce the veil of madness drawn tight around my mind. Either way, phantom or flash, they seemed oblivious to our presence. I tightened my grip on my companion's clammy hand, moving slowly between the pillars towards the cavern's far side where the tunnel beckoned us onward. The pallid figures continued to drift past murmuring, their distorted faces a mask of sorrow. They offered no threat nor aid, only deepening the atmosphere of strangeness, smothering all sense. Heart pounding, I quickened our pace toward the passage exit. But abruptly, Justine's saccharine voice rang out, freezing us in place. "Leaving so soon, why? You've only just arrived." I whirled, glaring about for the source as her melodious laughter echoed. What are these phantoms, Justine, more illusion? Not everything is deception, my subject. Sometimes one simply uncovers truth buried long ago. Amusement rippled in Justine's disembodied voice. These poor creatures cannot leave, but neither have decades in darkness dimmed their radiance. They illuminate the way for those wise enough to follow. I frowned, peering closer at the spectral wanderers. Their liquid gazes reflected only endless melancholy and madness. Your riddles serve nothing, Justine. We will find our own path. Oh, but it is all connected, Justine replied cryptically. Go, enjoy the revelation ahead. Not all doors lead to suffering, is some to ecstasy if you embrace their promise. Her ominous words lingered even after the voice faded away. With deep unease, I turned and hurried with my companion into the awaiting darkness. The pleas of the spirits still whispered in my mind. though I knew not what they wanted of me. But I feared Justine was drawing us ever nearer to a tipping point beyond which lay utter ruin. Chapter 19. Disoriented and drained, we shuffled endlessly through the branching catacomb tunnels until they finally emptied us into a vast chamber. I froze, blinking in disbelief. The cavern had been transformed into some kind of demented shrine or temple dedicated to obscure occult icons. The soaring vaulted ceilings were lost in shadow. Below, the flagged stone floor was etched with elaborate mystic symbols, and at its center yawned a deep circular pit ringed with candles. Dark alcoves lined the walls, each containing bizarre shrouded altars that seemed to pulse with eldritch energy. The entire scene possessed a nightmarish quality, blurred and disjointed, as if teetering on the brink between realities. I blinked hard, struggling to focus. The occult setting disturbed me, hinting at the true darkness lurking beneath Justine's refined veneer. Before I could get my bearings, Justine's saccharine voice cut through the stillness. "Welcome, my subject. We've traversed long and weary roads together, you and I, but now we stand at the journey's end." I tensed, peering about warily. "Enough riddles, Justine. What is this place?" Amused laughter echoed. "Why, these are my private chambers of reflection, of course, but more importantly, your final crucible." Anticipation entered Justine's tone. "Pass this last trial, and perhaps then you shall have the answers you crave." Her voice trailed off ominously. I shared an uneasy glance with my companion. We were both utterly spent, physically and mentally. I wasn't sure either of us could endure another of Justine's ordeals. But refusing to play her sadistic game would likely only invite swifter ruin. Jaw clenched, I steeled myself and descended the shadowy steps towards the chamber floor. This test would be like all the others, a trap crafted to strip away all that remained of our humanity. But even now, a glimmer of hope endured. We would face the darkness on our own terms, not Justine's. And perhaps that would be enough. Ghosts of past torments hounded my steps as I crossed the eldritch sigils etched in the ancient stone. But strangely, nothing threatened us in this occult sanctum. The waiting stillness almost taunted me as I peered into each unholy alcove, braced for fresh horrors. Then, between two pillars, I glimpsed a corridor leading deeper into the temple. Steeling my nerves once more, I gestured for my companion to follow. The final threshold awaited. Chapter 20. Apprehension clawed at me as we descended the shadowy temple corridor. But instead of the sadistic tableaus I'd steeled myself for, it opened into a scene of baffling normalcy, a well-appointed parlor where genteel guests mingled and laughed over drinks. Except the guests were pallid specters, dressed in formal attire decades out of fashion, their smiles never reaching dead eyes. I froze, struggling to reconcile the happenings against the madness and danger that hounded our every step in this place. But the ghostly partygoers took no notice of us, fading in and out of distorted focus like a broken film reel. Hallucinatory visions crafted by Justine seemed the only rational explanation. But to what purpose? Warily, we crept along the rune's fringes studying the bizarre scenario. The fire burning in the ornate hearth gave no heat, the pineapple ice sculpture on the buffet no chill. The floor was etched with the same eldritch symbols as the ritual chamber outside, glimpsed when the revelers' misty forms dissolved momentarily. Everything bled into a nightmarish blur. I blinked hard, vertigo threatened to pull me under as the surreal drama unfolded meaninglessly around us. Perhaps we had slipped into the realms of madness already, and Justine's prison was itself now the delusion. Do you appreciate my little soiree? Justine's saccharine voice wafted suddenly through the haze. I find the past holds such inspiration, don't you think? I turned about, searching for the speakers within the illusions. I don't understand. What is this spectacle meant to prove? Amused laughter answered. Why must everything have meaning? Some doors lead only to mystery. The board is set for the final game, but how it unfolds depends on your capacity to shed limitations. Her tone turned sinister. Free your mind, embrace potential. Only then can our union transcend flesh. I suppressed a shudder at her dark riddle. This test was clearly designed to further unravel our psyches. But as long as we retain even some fleeting shred of self-insanity, Justine's efforts were for naught. Spotting an untouched goblet on a floating tray, I lifted and drained it defiantly, embracing the moment's illusion of normalcy and control. The specter guests continued their ghostly masquerade oblivious. But across the room, watching from the shadowed threshold, stood a lone still figure, a woman in an elegant black gown, her pale eyes meeting mine with interest. Justine. The final trial had begun. Grimly, I moved to confront her, my companion's steps steadying my own. If this was in-game, then let that cursed woman reveal her true face at last. Chapter 21. I moved through the surreal masquerade, the ghostly revelers parting around me in slow, distorted drifts. At the room's far threshold, Justine Florbelle watched my approach, elegant in her black evening gown, a glass of burgundy liquid swirling lazily in hand. Here amidst her illusions, the creator and the created at last conversed face to face. I halted before her, meeting that calculating gaze directly. Why the deception, Justine? Why not simply speak plainly your purpose? Full lips curved into a smile. And where is the pleasure in that? I find obfuscation so stimulating, don't you? This is just a gain to you, I accused bitterly. Oh yes, the very best gain, Justine replied with rapturous intensity. To dangle truth so closely as it eludes desperate grasps, exquisite, like music made agony. Disgust roiled inside me. You twist every act to evil. I nodded back at her ghostly gathering. What is this sick pageant meant to achieve? Justine's eyes gleamed. No more or less than the other tests you believe you brave. All doors lead inward, if you possess the vision to see. She extended her wine glass towards me in invitation. The final chamber awaits. Will you embrace its promise? I hesitated, staring at the proffered glass. Throughout Justine's cruel trials, I had clung to my identity and principles even when she blurred every line. To accept drink now seemed final surrender. I've come this far without compromising who I am, I answered quietly. Your games proved nothing. Justine's smile widened, razor sharp. Is that your final answer? The choice cannot be unmade. Will you walk the dark path or remain condemned in ignorant light? I gazed into the glass blood-hued contents. The cloying perfume raised memories of decay and pain, of screams and soft-spoken threats. But in those blood-drenched moments, my humanity had burned all the brighter for having resisted descending fully into the abyss. Justine could degrade my body, but my spirit remained my own. I met her gaze squarely. I choose freedom, and I knocked the glass from her hand. It shattered wetly on the stone floor. For a moment, surprise flickered across Justine's face. Then her lips curved upwards, and she began to laugh, a grating, unhinged sound. Well done, my subject, you have passed the final test. Around us, the illusions melted away, and the temple chamber reappeared. I blinked, disoriented by the sudden transition. Come, let us conclude our business. Justine's form shimmered as she turned and glided into the darkness. Uneasily, I followed with my companion close behind. Whatever twisted ritual Justine had planned for this conclusion, we walked to meet it with heads unbowed. Her games were at an end. The time had come for truth. Chapter 22. My footsteps echoed as Justine led me from her pagan temple back into the familiar dreary corridors of Brennenburg Asylum. After the surreal distortions of her occult chambers, the return of cold reality felt jarring. What had happened back there? Had we truly walked between worlds into Justine's own demented realm of possibility? Or were the memories mere fever dreams, projected from my own fraying psyche? Either notion unsettled me deeply. Justine strode on in silence, black gown whispering along the rough stones. Cautiously, I followed until we arrived at a heavy oak door carved with disturbing figures. The entrance to her inner sanctum? She turned to me, pale eyes glittering with anticipation. My wayward subject, this is where we part ways at last. I tensed. Her pleasant words felt like the executioner's final prayers before the axe fell. What are you going to do to me? Full lips curved into a smile. Do why? Give you the keys, of course. I keep my promises. She extended her hand gracefully. Resting on her upturned palm lay 2 ornate keys joined by a ring. I blinked, hesitated. The keys to leave this place? Indeed, you passed my tests admirably. As agreed, I now bestow upon you the power to depart freely. Wearily, I lifted the keys from her outstretched hand. Their weight felt real enough. I scrutinized Justine's expression, but found no deception there. Only anticipation, as if waiting to observe what choice I would make. Could it be real? An escape from this endless nightmare? My heart thrilled at the notion, but caution tempered it. All of Justine's gifts thus far had proven poisoned. As if sensing my doubt, she smiled wider. Sometimes truth cuts deeper than lies. I confess it pleases me watching you wrestle with that razor's edge. Will you now fear freedom because I grant it? I studied the keys in my palm, conflicted. Even if Justine spoke true, how could I simply leave others trapped here? As if hearing my thoughts, her gaze sharpened. The keys unlock only your own way, but you've learned difficult lessons about sacrifice, have you not? When I remained silent, Justine continued softly. Take heart, your ordeals were no mere whims. A purpose exists, if you possess the vision to grasp it. She leaned forward, breath whispering along my skin. I've so cherished watching you unfurl these past days, emerging from your chrysalis. Not all who enter here find the way back to the light. You possess rare spirit. Her words slithered through me, their meaning obscured by silken half-truths. I stepped back warily. Your purpose remains dark, but I reject the path you peddle. Something flashed in her pale eyes. Anger? Admiration? You cannot see the whole shape yet, but perhaps in time. Justine composed herself, manner leisurely once more. But come, let us conclude our time together for now. She opened the carved door, revealing a small chamber beyond furnished with opulent but tasteless ornateness. Please, make yourself comfortable. Warily, I crossed the threshold into the garish sitting room. This almost seemed some grotesque facsimile of hospitality. Justine smiled and sat gracefully upon a gilded sofa. Uneasily, I took a seat opposite her. The time had come to somehow make sense of the nightmare. Justine eyed me keenly across the distance separating us, as if peering through the veil of reality itself. You have questions, I'm sure. I stared back, hardly knowing where to begin unraveling the tangle of mysteries ensnaring me. Who am I? I asked finally. Before coming here there is nothing. Why should there be? Justine mused. The past is prologue. All that matters now is the story you craft going forward. I leaned forward intently. But how much of what I experienced here was real, your occult rituals, the impossible tunnels, was any of it true? Justine's smile turned cryptic. Truth is such a slippery concept, is it not? Reality shapes itself to match our own limitations. You saw precisely what you were meant to, as did I. I sat back, unsatisfied by her elusive responses. Justine remained content to speak in riddles. But her keys still weighed heavy in my hand, offering possible escape if I dared seize it. I glanced down at the ornate keys in my palm, considering my options carefully. Though part of me yearned to flee this place immediately, doubts lingered. I still understood so little of what had transpired here. Looking up, I met Justine's pale gaze. You claim to admire my spirit, yet your actions have been nothing but cruelty. Why? Amusement quirked her lips. One man's cruelty is another's enlightenment. I forged an environment to unbind you from limitation. Your suffering was the chisel and your soul the pearl. I shook my head bitterly. You speak like a prophet, but torture like a devil. Do I? Justine raised one delicate eyebrow. Perhaps it merely feels thus, when preconceptions shatter in the forge of truth. My fingers tightened around the keys until the metal edges dug painfully into my skin. Justine would forever speak in circles and contradictions. I would gain no clean answers from her. Slowly I stood, resolve hardening within me. I care nothing for your sophistry. I will leave this place, and if able, help free others from your grasp. I moved toward the door, but paused to meet her hooded gaze one last time. Whatever your purpose, it ends in failure. I turned away, expecting mocking retort or explosive rage. But instead, Justine only watched me go with an enigmatic smile. We shall see, my subject, we shall see. Striding from the room, I felt her heavy gaze between my shoulder blades until the oaken door closed, sealing her away. I leaned against the rough wood for a moment, steadying my whirling thoughts. Freedom beckoned, but could I ever truly escape Justine's lingering influence? Her world blurred reality to incomprehension, undermined truth itself. I clutched the cold keys tightly, feeling their bite. No matter the answers still shrouded in shadow, I controlled my fate now. Justine's twisted games were done. With my companion close behind, I strode down the corridor, each step carrying me further from madness. The doors ahead promised liberation of a kind, though perhaps not of mine. But after enduring Justine's crucible, we would step boldly onward chasing truth, no longer defined by her darkness. The keys turned easily in the locks barring our escape. As the final door creaked open, daylight spilled through, warm and blinding. The light of freedom, beckoning us forward out of shadow into a frail, hopeful dawn. The bright sunlight stunned my eyes as we emerged from the gloom of Brennenburg Asylum onto a dusty rural road winding through the forested hills. I paused, breathing in the fresh air scented with pine, so different from the fetid stench that pervaded Justine's domain. The warmth of the sun, caressing my skin, felt almost alien after so long spent in darkness and fear. Were we truly free? I gazed up at the imposing facade of the asylum receding behind us, all spires and iron fences. Part of me hardly dared believe we had escaped Justine's grasp. She remained a looming shadow in my psyche, her maze of contradictions and cruelty haunting me still. Shaking off the chill of remembered horrors, I focused on putting one foot in front of the other down the winding road. My companion and I clung close, drawing comfort from each other. The simple feel of her hand clasping mine kept me anchored in the moment. We had survived by retaining our humanity and sanity against unrelenting threat. Whatever Justine's purpose with her sadistic trials, she had failed to wholly consume us. Each small act of resistance and compassion had been a defiance. The sun shifted behind gathering clouds as we crested a hill, revealing a distant village tucked in the rolling valley below. Smoke curled from chimneys and horses grazed in green meadows split by meandering streams. The bucolic sight kindled something within me, not quite hope, but possibility. I chanced to heal and perhaps find meaning again. My companion met my gaze and squeezed my hand, her eyes bright with reflected optimism. Step by step we continued onward, leaving the looming asylum behind. Justine remained enthroned in shadow, but that world no longer defined us. Light still existed beyond the darkness if we but had courage to seek it. And those scars of our ordeal would forever mark me. In enduring we had won a quiet victory, the defiant triumph of the human spirit. Justine had tried to reduce us to hollow pieces in her game, but we had walked away whole. The end.